This conference is being recorded. Only the main conference is recorded.
Hello. Hello, folks. Welcome and thank you for joining this discussion regarding the 20 to 21 draft strategic plan for the Michigan Campaign to End Homelessness. We're slated to start at 9. I'll give it maybe a minute and then we'll go ahead and get this webinar underway. I want to be respectful of everyone's time this morning. Okay, we'll go ahead and get the webinar started. Thanks again for being here on this call. As you might have heard as you joined the call, your line is muted. We do ask that you stay muted. We're slated to have well over 60 folks join us on the webinar. So in order to ensure that we're able to all hear one another and hear the content, we ask that you stay muted. This webinar is being recorded. So for your colleagues who you know who are unable to make this call this morning, they will have an opportunity to go back and listen to the webinar as well as view the slides. And if you need to go back through as well and take another listen and look, you'll be able to do that as well. I will introduce myself before I get the webinar underway. My name is Mercedes Brown. I'm the Michigan Director with the Corporation for Supportive Housing. CSH was brought in to support the Michigan campaign through the Michigan Homeless Policy Council and redoing the 2-year strategic plan. And so I've been tapped to help facilitate this town hall conversation. And so you're stuck with me for this morning. So I wanted to share that. Another reminder I'd like to, before we get this conversation underway, I'd like to share with folks that you might note and have seen the draft strategies were sent out to you all last Thursday, I believe. And so hopefully everyone's had an opportunity to at least take a look at them. It will be really helpful for this conversation this morning. In an hour, I won't have enough time to comb through the strategies in any deep detail. And so hopefully you got an opportunity to take a look at them. I will hit the high points and we will engage you further to get your thoughts, reflections, and feedback on what we captured well, what we miscaptured, and what we missed entirely. So you will have an opportunity to weigh in before we finalize the strategic plan. So thank you. Another thing I want to note before we get the call underway is the 2-year time frame. So you might notice it's 20 to 21. In the past, our plan that expired in December of 2019 was a 3-year strategic plan. In an effort to be more in line with the emerging best practice around states holding themselves to a shorter time frame to ensure that the plans are action oriented and that the actions on the plan are really those that are needed to move the dial on homelessness. We sort of fell in line in Michigan and are trying our hand at a shorter time frame to see how much closer we might get in this 2 years than we have historically at moving the dial and ending and preventing homelessness for folks across the state. So I wanted to call that out as well before we got started. And without further ado, I am going to shift us into the content. I can work this Zoom webinar. Fantastic. So I hear folks joining. Just join and get caught up. Very quickly, I'd like to run us through the agenda, a quick level set to make sure that we're all on the same page. So welcome again to everyone. I will shift momentarily into providing brief background on the plan development process, as well as the process that the campaign undertook to engage stakeholders and collect feedback over the summer of 2019. I'll swing into a high-level overview of the draft strategic plan, talking through, not again in super deep detail, but talking through at a high level the 4 strategies that came out of what we heard across the state, best practices, and so on. We'll sort of swing into a very brief stakeholder feedback on the strategies through a poll that we'll launch. And then I'll close us out with talking about next steps, as well as opportunities for you to provide more feedback around the draft strategies as they sort of currently are in this iteration. I will give us a little background. For those of you, I know we probably have a decent amount of overlap and folks who came out to one of the 5 listening sessions or focus groups over the summer. And so for those of you, this will be a review, but I want to make sure that we're all on the same page around the process that the campaign undertook to arrive at the sort of current state of strategies that you hopefully have received last Thursday. So the campaign kicked off the process to update the statewide plan, which again expired in December of last year, in June, with a retreat of both the Michigan Homeless Policy Council and the Michigan Interagency Council on Homelessness. Throughout the process, we engaged in the most robust stakeholder engagement and feedback than we have historically, engaging the field across 5 regions in the state of Michigan with an eye towards identifying what folks feel are the most pressing and critical barriers to ending and preventing homelessness, to help the campaign leadership gain a deeper understanding of what those barriers are, as well as some innovative ideas that we might pilot through this new 2-year plan, as well as learn about what's already happening across the state where we've seen successes in communities. And so you'll see on the slide there, if you were able to view the webinar, reviewing the slide deck, that we kicked off the tour in Mackinac City and wrapped it in Big Rapids. So thanks folks who participated. Throughout those sessions, we were able to collect and really synthesize and organize the feedback into 4 high-level themes, which we'll share with you now. Some of you may be familiar with this slide. We heard from the field loud and clear that there is still significant lack of quality affordable housing. Folks are really clear to emphasize the quality here. Everything from a lack of supportive housing, particularly services, to vouchers, as well as naturally reoccurring affordable housing, especially for folks who have some specific challenges like criminal justice sector involvement. So we heard that pretty loud and clear, and felt that we needed to stay the course in terms of prioritizing efforts that would address the lack of quality affordable housing. We also heard a lot from the field around the lack of adequate income, that continues to be a barrier, especially when transitioning folks from time-bound rental subsidies like rapid rehousing programs into permanent housing, that not having access to employment or being underemployed, and also having clients experience issues with receiving and maintaining entitlement benefits through the state continue to be a challenge as well. In addition, we heard that there were challenges around healthcare, and then this general sense that there was more that the state could be doing to collaborate across sectors. And so you can see that, hopefully you had an opportunity to see that we elevated some strategies and prioritized cross-sector systems collaborative work in response to that feedback. And lastly, we heard that there continues to be a lack of adequate and affordable childcare or programming for families who have young children, youth, and then sort of under this banner, we also heard loud and clear across the field that this concept of a benefits cliff, where folks increase their income nominally and then their benefits drop off in the form of childcare, also in the form of financial assistance, that continues to be a barrier. So we heard a lot of feedback to that end. Sorry. Let me go back and let me get myself reorganized here. Okay, there's one more slide that is hidden that I'll cover before I shift into this plan. For whatever reason, my apologies for that malfunction. In addition to hearing about these, to sort of hearing feedback that fell into these four themes, we also heard from the field that the new plan should include responses in a number of areas. The field was really clear, you all were clear, that we need to include responses that address the racial disparities that we continue to observe in our Michigan homelessness data. We heard again the desire to see stronger cross-sector systems alignment, in particular with health, child welfare, criminal justice, and et cetera. Those were a few sectors that got elevated as they were mentioned repeatedly across the listening sessions. We also heard a desire to have an increased focus in the new plan on prevention and diversion. And then, and I know this made a lot of our data nerds really excited, a strong desire from the field to better leverage data to ultimately more effectively serve folks experiencing homelessness. And those are, you can see, I noted some ways that we heard we could specifically leverage data to impact program and system design, impact policies and procedures, and enable that cross-sector data matching for the purpose of pairing folks with specialized resources that might only be available if they meet certain criteria and are straddling multiple systems. We also heard from the field that folks would like to see us more authentically partner with folks with lived experiences in homelessness. And then lastly, a desire for a heightened focus in the new plan on training and capacity building, especially in the areas of racial equity and data analytics. So from all of that great feedback that came in the form of tons of sticky notes, lots of boisterous stakeholders, we arrived at our four strategies, our proposed strategies in the 20 to 21 strategic plan. But before I shift there, I'd like to tell you about something new that we're piloting in this strategic plan. In line with best practices that we've observed from states with really strong statewide plans to end and prevent homelessness, this concept of grounding our work in a set of guiding principles is something that I'd like to share with you before we start to talk through those four strategies that we came out with. In the new plan, the campaign is committed to doubling down on deploying specific efforts and strategies, housing solutions that strive to accomplish four things. And these align very well with the feedback that we received from the field. The first is striving to address racial disparities across the statewide homeless response system. in line with the feedback we received from the field, in line with our own understanding that we can shift beyond just admiring the disparities and noting them in annual reports, but we might actually move to action and set in motion, and over the next 2 years, some specific strategies that will help us get further from where we are today. And here I noted an increase, how that might play out, and you might have observed this and if you read the strategies in advance, an increased focus on evaluating statewide policies and procedures to ensure that they don't perpetuate inequity or create racial disparities. And so in a 2-year time frame, we have to keep ourselves honest to what we can accomplish, ensuring that goals are both aspirational but realistic. And so there's a lot we can do in this vein, but one of the most highest impact things we can do is evaluate our statewide policies and procedures and ensure that they are indeed creating inequity. Secondly, another principle that we want to have woven through all of the priorities, the strategies, and our measurement plan is this commitment to authentically include the participation of folks with lived experiences, moving beyond time-bound, single-purpose, potentially one-sided engagement to those that are ongoing partnerships. We heard that from actually people who had lived experience who participated in one or more of the listening sessions over the summer. We also want to double down on our commitment to effectively leverage cross-sector data. We heard data come up a lot as a shortfall as well as an opportunity of the way our campaign is currently structured. And so under the new plan, we want to leverage data to drive results, from everything from improving data quality to doing more data matching to potentially scale and replicate some efforts we've seen in the state where we're pairing and matching Medicaid data with HMIS data. And lastly, to sort of round out our set of principles that we hope will ground the plan, we want to drive innovation, collaboration, and strategic alignment across systems. You see there is a strategy that almost exclusively focuses on this. We want to bring folks who are in adjacent systems into the solution building, from our partners in the health sector to those in the justice and child welfare sector, to ensure that they're a part of the response to ending and preventing homelessness across the state. All right, now that I covered that, which we hope, and hold us accountable when you're providing the feedback after this call, help us to see our blind spots where we've made commitments to embedding those 4 principles and sort of living those through the actual plan, and where we missed the mark, because we do have blind spots for sure. And so hoping that those align with what you think are needed to help really guide a lot of our strategies over the next couple of years. I'll shift us now into a very high level overview of the new strategies. Some of them you might have noticed are not entirely new. Some are some reframes or reset on past strategies, and some are new entirely. So I'll shift us now to reviewing those. In line with what we heard from the field, there needs to be continued focus on increasing access to stable and affordable housing. If you recall a couple slides back, that was the #1 theme that emerged across all listening sessions. And so under this plan, we'll include a strategic focus on expanding access to affordable housing through the continued use of federal and state programs. In additionally, and I believe this is the strategy with the most amount of sub-strategies. We'll do a lot, so I tried to distill it up on this slide for you all, but we'll include an increased focus on aligning with continuums of care to leverage creative solutions to engage landlords and local municipalities with an eye towards expanding access to affordable housing, so increasing the local stock. Secondly, you'll see noted in the strategies the focus on ensuring system diversion and homelessness prevention. Now, that's a brand new strategy in line with the feedback that we heard loud and clear from the field, as well as best practices. In fact, USICH has elevated this as a new strategy in the federal strategic plan, Home Together. So under this plan, again, reminding us that we're bound to a 2-year time frame. So there's a lot we could do, but we need to be both realistic as well as aspirational in our goal setting. So under that plan, you see a lot of piloting and learning. So we want to include a strategic focus on expanding programming that exists in pockets of the state that already promotes prevention and diversion strategies and has those components. There are a number of examples where we can learn from and then take that to potentially roll up into scaling opportunities across the state of Michigan. So what we really want to do here is learn from what's happening, create where we can toolkits and blueprints that can be used in communities that are have the capacity and the interest to implement homelessness diversion in particular, but then beef up homelessness prevention efforts in their communities. The third set of strategies that we've included in the plan is an increased focus on advancing cross-sector system alignment to impact the other social determinants of health beyond housing. And this one is also one to really keep in mind, that we're bound by the 2-year limitation rather. But under this set of strategies, we want to include an increased focus on leveraging the SDOH framework, a really strong framework that is really taking wave and I think having significant impact on how cross-sector systems work is done, as it's sort of naturally and sort of emerging out of the health sector with a desire to see housing as healthcare, so to speak, and partner more efficiently with those in the housing industry to improve health outcomes. And the same thing can be said for food insecurity. And so you can see under that, if you had an opportunity to take a look at the draft strategies, that we included a decent amount of goals that are realistic over the next couple of years to help get us further in that regard. And then lastly, we had a focus on improving the quality of the statewide service delivery system. This one is a reset on past strategies, on a past strategy, but it's very much in line with what we heard from the field over the last year. Here we're focusing on enhancing provider and system quality through training and capacity building. We heard communities raise their hand and express interest for specialized training in line with best practices. And so we hope to deliver here. We also hope to include strategies aimed at building statewide capacity and commitment to racial equity. No matter which region we were engaging folks in, racial equity came up as a priority. And so we tried to capture that here under the plan. And then lastly, include increased focus on deepening data analytics skills across the state to, again, support all of these other strategies, in particular the cross-sector system alignment work, where we're using data to actually set those strategies in motion. All right. Time check, we're doing great on time. Next, I'm going to shift us. That was a high-level overview of the 4 strategies that were born out of the feedback that we received, as well as what we observed in national best practices. These slides have a lot of content on them. I will not read them. It aligns very nicely with the draft strategies that you would receive via email last week. So if you have them in front of you, take a look at them. Take a look at them later. I just wanted to take a moment to elevate some of the sub-strategies underneath the 4 strategies for us to sort of noodle on during this conversation. Again, under strategy 1, which has an explicit focus on increasing access to stable and affordable housing, we're looking to continue a lot of the great work that's been stood up over the last couple years through the use of the Federal Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program, or LIHTC, to have significant impacts on supportive housing unit production. We want to stay the course where we've made changes in the last qualified allocation plan to deeply prioritize those with the most significant needs in line with our state plan, where we've made efforts to raise the bar around quality. We want to, over the next 2 years, continue those efforts and expand where we can. And so you can see many of the strategies or sub-strategies elevated under this first strategy speak almost explicitly to continuing the use of LIHTC to do that deep targeting both areas in the state's geography that have the highest rates of need as well as participants. And you also see a commitment to double down on ensuring that screening practices are inclusive, that we are requiring developments to actually be living their commitments and screening in rather than screening out when we use the low-income tax credit program to create supportive housing. In addition, just would like to highlight the desire of the campaign to explore innovative uses of federal resources to fund housing and services. I know this has been a topic of conversation in the state of Michigan for some time, exploring the use of the TANF resources for time-limited, non-reoccurring rental assistance in a way that's in line with innovative emerging best practices in states who figured out how to retool those unused resources towards providing actual rental assistance. The other sub-strategy that I want to highlight is the campaign's commitment to partnering with COC, so that's strategy 1E, and local units of government to promote ordinances and other creative solutions that enable greater access to rental housing by limiting landlord screening or amending current screening processes. So there's lots of examples across the state already where the municipalities have adopted ordinances, have partnered strategically with landlords, and that has sort of opened up additional units on the private landlord market to pair folks with rental assistance at times and without. I will shift this now to strategy 2. Under strategy 2, again, that's the strategy focused on ensuring system diversion and homelessness prevention, the brand new strategy. It's no surprise that the strategy looks a little bit leaner than the prior strategy. And if you have had an opportunity to take a look at the draft strategic plan, then you will see that there is a detailed measurement plan at this point. Some of it is still being fleshed out, so you would have seen red boxes in the sort of timeline. So we had a measurable outcome, and then we have the year 2020 through 2021. And in some areas, campaign leadership were really clear about when we could commit to hitting those milestones. In other areas, it requires a great deal of coordination outside of the sort of housing and homelessness sector. So we need to be really intentional around what timelines we attach to those efforts. But nonetheless, this second strategy is a bit leaner, and it's leaner intentionally. Again, as I mentioned earlier, the goal is to learn what we can from best practices nationwide, as well as successful implementations in the state of Michigan, learning from our failures in the state of Michigan. And so these two sub-strategies are really intended to help us sort of not bite off more than we can chew in 2 years, and also push ourselves to be expanding our strategies to include ones that do focus on statewide strategies that do have a heightened focus on preventing homeless system and shelter inflow where we can, by trying to preserve and salvage housing options whenever possible. So under sub-strategy 2A, you see our intended focus on leveraging best practices and resources to promote, again, programming that supports prevention and shelter diversion whenever possible. Through that, we hope to explore the creative use of resources to sustain pilots. There are a number of pilots underway already that have a diversion focus. There are prevention programming, which we are very well aware, that has been underway for some time. And so the hope is that we can learn from those and potentially roll up toolkits and other job aids that might be used at the local level for scaling and replication efforts where possible. Lastly, under this strategy, we know in order to be responsive to inflow and reducing the number of folks who are falling into homelessness due to eviction, specifically, the campaign is setting out over the next 2 years to, in partnership with communities, with you all, produce a blueprint for the expansion of eviction diversion, in particular, across the state of Michigan. So stay tuned in that regard. But again, sort of focusing in more narrowly in order to really sort of learn from our mistakes, learn from the mistakes and successes from our colleagues across the country, and arrive at some solid strategies that can be really leveraged to ensure that folks are prevented from entering homelessness whenever possible. I'll shift this now to strategy 3. So again, strategy 3 was that, in the beginning, a very big and unwieldy strategy that is large by design in a lot of ways, with a focus on advancing cross-sector system alignment to impact those other social determinants of health that I referenced earlier. The campaign leadership, though, has really taken to this particular strategy, been really intentional around how we both set goals that are ambitious as well as reasonable, and how we account for work that's in the queue that we know will have impacts on our ability to advance that cross-sector system alignment work. And so I'll just highlight a couple under strategy 3 here. We know, and our state has done a remarkable job, quite frankly, and there's certainly a lot of work to be done in this area, but partnering with our partners in the healthcare sector, particularly those both in primary and behavioral health, and to both encourage and support the development of local partnerships that might result in prioritization, outreach, and stabilization efforts of folks experiencing homelessness. And we have a lot of examples to learn from through the state's innovation project, to draw in from those experiences of those 5 communities to identify ways in which we can sort of position communities to be more effectively partnering with their local healthcare providers. In addition, the campaign is committed to partnering with COCs to build stronger linkages between domestic violence programs and the homeless response system to more effectively serve survivors experiencing homelessness. That was another population that was elevated across all of the regional listening sessions, that folks were feeling like we were missing the mark on connecting programs that explicitly serve survivors to our homeless system at large. And so under this plan, we will be really intentional around making those linkages where possible to make sure that we're providing the most well-rounded services and most effective services to folks, survivors experiencing homelessness. And lastly, under this strategy 3C, the campaign committed to partnering with COCs to improve access to mainstream benefits, employment programs, and services to reduce people's financial vulnerability to homelessness. Again, if you recall from an earlier slide, in I think the last sort of rung of feedback under the themes, we received significant feedback around the benefits cliff. Folks were really clear that folks in their program are 1 or 2 paychecks away from experiencing homelessness, even when they're permanently housed in one of our housing programs. And so the campaign knew it needed to be responsive to challenges with benefits, employment, that make folks particularly vulnerable to being re-exposed to homelessness if they're successfully housed in the first place. And so you'll see under strategy number 3, a concerted effort in the next 2 years to try to move us closer to improving overall access to those mainstream benefits. We'll shift us now to strategy number 4, which is, again, a reset on a past strategy, which has an explicit focus on really shoring up our field, our industry, so that we're able to respond to what it continues to be and feel really demanding and challenging as we shift our focus to prioritizing those with the deepest needs. So we're bringing the field along and enabling the field to have the skills needed to do so. And so the strategies 4A through 4D really focus in that regard in a number of ways. Here, we're kicking it off with efforts and strategies that are aimed at enhancing industry proficiency by offering both topic-based training that we will learn from the field, what those are. So we'll learn the topics that are most salient and most important to your work, as well as piloting ongoing capacity building support in line with, again, community and statewide needs. And so if you have in front of you the more detailed set of strategies, you'll see there's a number of ways in which we hope to advance that beyond bringing trainings from everything from trauma-informed care, case management and supervision, all the way through to housing first and harm reduction. We're also hoping to leverage the use of peer learning collaboratives. Our state has a rich history of using those collaboratives in the past, and sort of we moved away from that. And with our new 2-year strategic plan, there's a lot of opportunities to learn from one another in the field, sharing best practices, as well as learn from our colleagues across the country. And so that's one way in which we hope to support ongoing capacity building beyond training over the next 2 years. Shifting to strategy 4B, we're hoping to build statewide understanding and capacity around better leveraging state and local performance data to inform service delivery, drive outcome achievement, and broader community engagement around housing solutions. And this one, ironically enough, again, ties back very nicely to the feedback that we heard and have been hearing for years from statewide stakeholders, and that some of the responsibility for bringing housing solutions to bear in communities is often siloed in particular sort of areas like the continuum of care leadership, maybe siloed with the HARA coordinated entry entities. And there is a desire and a commitment from the campaign to move us beyond that to a state in which it is a real community effort, and that we are bringing to bear the different perspectives and resources of folks across the community to support stronger infrastructure in local communities here. And we know data is directly connected to that. And we heard that loud and clear. So we'll double down over the next 2 years in that regard. Shifting us to strategy 4C. Here we're hoping to deepen, and this is a new one, deepen statewide understanding, commitment to an understanding of root causes and the impacts of racial inequity in the homeless response system through the use of disaggregated performance and access data. And here we know and have been waiting, so some of you might, if you could see me, might make a face at me. We've been waiting for some HUD tools and resources that we know will better equip us to be able to disaggregate both performance and access data to understand the extent of racial inequity and disparity, to better understand through actual outcomes data if people of color experiencing homelessness are actually faring worse in our housing programs. We know they are over-accessing our programs in a way that's disproportionate to their actual representation in overall census data, but we know very little about how they perform. Are our programs culturally sensitive? Are our programs set up in a way in which we are adequately serving and assessing and meeting the needs of people of color experiencing homelessness? So under strategy 4C, you'll see in the sort of more detailed measurement plan our intent to leverage the HUD Stella P platform to begin to do some of that disaggregating of the data to better wrap our arms around the extent and depth of the issue there. And shifting to strategy 4D, in line with the campaign's commitment to actively responding to racial inequity in the statewide homeless response system, we are committed to leveraging training, capacity building, policy and systems change strategies to strengthen the industry's capacity to advance racial equity. Now that is a mouthful, but in a nutshell, as I mentioned earlier, there are things that we could be doing both at the local level and at the state level to ensure that our policies, procedures, and practices don't create or perpetuate racial inequity and disparity, and we can assess that in a number of ways. There are resources out in the field that can help us assess those policies and procedures to see whether or not they are having a disproportionate impact, intentionally or unintentionally, on people of color experiencing homelessness. There are training opportunities that can continue to be brought to bear. We've had folks from Spark Out that have done trainings in 2019. There are communities that are on their own contracting with racial equity consultants who are doing training of folks at their coordinated entry to ensure that they are engaging with folks in the most culturally sensitive ways. And then there's also statewide exploration of our service prioritization tool to assess the extent to which it's leading to disproportionate, or whether or not it's not assessing adequately the needs of people of color experiencing homelessness. And so there's a number of efforts already underway that get us closer to living our commitment as a state to ensuring that our efforts are marching in the direction of racial inequity and not, or equity rather, and not perpetuating racial inequity. And so we're really excited to be introducing that sub-strategy under strategy 4 in the new 2-year strategic plan. Well, that was a lot. I should have said this at the outset that I talk at rapid speed. I have 100 of you on the call, which is really exciting. So My apologies for that. Hope folks were able to sort of hang in there and more importantly, have access to that more detailed set of strategies with both the strategic priorities, the sub-strategies, as well as the measurement plan, and are ready to provide some feedback to us on what you see as some opportunities in the plan and how you would like to inform and weigh in on what we have to date. I would like to launch, so you can see on the slide, if you're able to view the webinar from a computer, we do have some stakeholder feedback that we would love to collect from you. Much of this we'll end up getting from you in the form of a SurveyMonkey survey that'll end up coming out, I believe, today or tomorrow at the latest. From the folks over at MCTEH will send that out. So we'll get your responses to some of these questions. We do have some time on the webinar, so I am going to launch a very quick poll. If I could figure out the technology here, I think I can, to get your sense right now. You've heard from me. Hopefully you had an opportunity to at least quickly scan the plan. I'd like to get your input and feedback here. I'll launch this poll. If you could take a moment. Okay, perfect. It looks like it was effective. Take a moment and respond to this question. And then after you do that, be thinking about those questions that you see up on the slide here. And I'll watch them as they come in. And for folks who are on the phone but unable to participate in the survey, we're querying the group on whether or not they feel the draft covers the areas that you think are most important in moving the dial on homelessness across the state, and having folks to respond on the scale from everything from they see that all of the important areas are covered all the way through to they don't see that the draft contains and aligns with what the issues and the areas that they think are most critical. And thanks for folks. We're doing good in terms of response rate. Maybe it's trailing off. So keep voting if you can, or responding if you can. Based on the response rate of around 34%, we are seeing, although it's pretty close, so we'd love to hear some feedback from folks, that around 47% of folks are feeling strongly that all of the areas that they think are important are covered in the draft strategic plan, and they fully support the draft. We are seeing a contingent of around 43% of those who responded who think that most of the areas are important, that are of the highest importance, are indeed covered in the draft, and could support the draft. So perhaps there are some other areas where campaign leadership might have missed, and that's entirely possible. So that's indeed why we are going to send a follow-up survey out to this group to get your feedback through the SurveyMonkey platform on those areas that you think that we could bolster or build up. Perhaps you saw that based on the feedback you provided in the summer, or you've seen your colleagues provide in the summer, that we miss an opportunity to sort of weave through some of those themes as strongly as we committed to. And so we welcome your feedback in that regard. Okay. I am going to, looks like the voting is just about trailed off. So I'm in the polling here. And maybe share the results, but I'll close this down. And with the time that we do have left, we do have an opportunity, if we can, if I can work the electronics here, to have folks that might want to weigh in, unmute themselves. Again, we have 100 participants so far, so we won't be able to get through everyone, but if folks are either sending in messages through the chat box and they have some thoughts around the 3 strategies that are resonating with them, or those that appear to be less critical and less time sensitive, if folks can go in, you're welcome to provide feedback orally if you would like. And you should be able to unmute yourself by using the taskbar. That option is turned on for folks. Give it a minute. And if folks are still waking up, that's okay too. We will appreciate your feedback and take it electronically.
Hey Mercedes, it's Jessica here. I had a chat question come in, two now. So one question is, will the slide deck be available by PDF beyond just the webinar being recorded?
Yes, we can make the slide deck available. We'll send that out with the link to the SurveyMonkey.
Okay, and then the next question that came in is, any idea how the statewide training or assessment of training needs will happen?
Yeah, so at this point, we haven't gone deep into planning, but we do have, and I hear that question coming from someone who actually has in front of them the more detailed strategy. I think we did indicate a timeline that's pretty aggressive there, but we'll hope to partner with communities across the state to better understand the best mechanisms for conducting that evaluation. It will likely be in a way that is intentionally not redundant. I know the communities just participated in an HMIS or HMIS focused evaluation towards the end of last year. And so we'll be leveraging what we can from that, so sort of from those findings and recommendations to do our due diligence there, but we'll likely be engaging folks in a variety of ways, both electronically, targeted, in-person engagements as well to better understand some of those training needs. And I will add that folks over at MICA have already, as they are sort of in the past year, have led a lot of training, have gotten some insight from community stakeholders around some of those needs are. So in some ways, we might be sort of checking our assumptions that those are needed by pushing those out to stakeholders across the state to see if those are the most important topical training areas and areas of need. So more to come on how we'll do that, but I would imagine it would be a combination of both electronic feedback as well as some targeted outreach where we can to get insight from the field around what they need.
We have another question that came in, and it says, you mentioned partnership with those with lived experience as a foundational value for the process. And while it is mentioned briefly in the description for strategy 3, I don't see any specific strategies or objectives related to that. Is there anything thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Pam. This is what I meant earlier about keeping us honest. So the group of the folks on the Homeless Policy Council that have been charged with taking all your feedback together and pulling this set of draft strategies together noted right after we got it out that there were at least a couple areas where we missed opportunities to thread those commitments through in a much more obvious way through the draft strategy. So Pam, that is indeed an area where we would like your input and feedback and the input and feedback from your colleagues around how to embed that through the strategies more intentionally. You're right, there's a couple areas where it's mentioned, but we do think that we can beef up our efforts over the next 2 years to really live that commitment. So that's duly noted.
Thanks, Mercedes. So I have another question that also includes a comment about, it looks like people might not be able to unmute themselves. So I think on your option, you can unmute all, but that might also lead to a lot of noise. So, so I'm not sure how you want to handle that one, but the person that couldn't unmute did send in the question, and the question is, the feedback on the plan is that I think it lays out a great strategy forward and prioritizes the right solutions. My only addition is to include a commitment to addressing youth homelessness, which can look different from adult homelessness in significant ways that impact how systems should operate, and addressing LGBTQ+ equity with racial equity.
Oh, that's so. Just I'll take it in 2 parts. I think for the time that we have left on the call, and it's working out nicely with such a large group, I won't take the approach of unmuting all. If folks can bear with us and send your questions through the chat, and Jessica and I can wrangle them and answer them in the way that we have been. And if folks are okay with that, we greatly appreciate that approach. I've just jotted down the comments around the inclusion of a explicit commitment to addressing youth homelessness and that intersection with LGBTQ plus youth, as well as racial inequity as well. That's spot on. Again, another area where campaign leadership recognizes the opportunity to sort of include it, even if it's, again, and I think this is where we're really having to be honest with ourselves and in terms of what's realistic over the next 2 years, but there are some commitments that we can make and activities that we can prioritize in the next 2 years that are absolutely in line with that piece of feedback, which is really spot on. I will add that there are currently some strategies that you will not see listed in the plan because they are what's required to move us forward on those strategies are partnerships beyond our traditional suspects in the housing and homelessness industry. So I will add that there is at least one behind the scenes strategy that is being worked out that almost speaks explicitly to youth homelessness. And so I think there's an opportunity to build out and incorporate some of the recommendations that you just read off, Jessica, from the person who sent that into the chat box. So again, duly noted. Any other questions? Do you see any? I'm monitoring the chat now too, Jessica, just so you know. I didn't see that one though.
Great, thank you. I think, yeah, some people have the option of sending to everybody or sending to the host privately. So I'll let you know if I see any others.
Fantastic. Okay, well, you can let me know if others pop up. I'll shift us in a moment. Again, you'll see questions through the SurveyMonkey platform that sort of seek to elicit your responses around these sort of buckets of feedback, trying to better understand what's resonating with you, what isn't resonating with you, what we're addressing, and how that aligns with what you think makes the most sense, where there's opportunities to deprioritize less time-sensitive strategies that we prioritize over the next 2 years. So do be really thorough in your responses to that SurveyMonkey poll. I will shift us to closing and discussing next steps, if that's okay with folks. Thanks again for all of you for participating in this stakeholder feedback session, and for those of you who've hung in there. You participated over the summer during the regional listening tour as well. You came out to one or more. There were people who couldn't get enough of engaging with us around the planet, so they did show up multiple times. So thank you for your feedback. It was invaluable, and we hope that we're able to, with the feedback that you provided today on this call and subsequent feedback that you'll provide through the SurveyMonkey follow-up questionnaire, that we can look for opportunities to be responsive to your concerns and embed them where possible in this 2-year plan. So thank you for that. And so with that, I mentioned that you should look for that poll or survey either today or tomorrow at the latest. That'll come out, and we'll be sure to attach the slide deck as a PDF attachment, so folks will have access to that and won't necessarily need to go back through and listen to the webinar in order to see that. So we'll ensure that we do that. Again, look for opportunities to incorporate your feedback. And then we have a tall order before us, so we do feel really good about where we are based on both your feedback and also the feedback that we've been collecting since we set out to redo this plan. We're close to being able to finalize in the coming weeks. And the hope is that Michigan Interagency Council on Homelessness, the ICH, is slated to adopt the plan in March. Their meeting is being scheduled. We hope to have them adopt the plan and shortly thereafter kick off implementation. I mean, as you all are probably already thinking, we're in the first quarter of the first year of the 2-year plan. So there will be there are some time-sensitive items in there, and we try to hold ourselves accountable on the implementation timeline to ensure that we are able to leverage the year 2020 and not have it be a wash. And so there will be, there's the hope that we'll be able to kick off the the implementation in spring of 2020. You will note when you see, and we will be partnering with you all to better understand how we can get this right. But there is a desire to, with the 2-year strategic plan, be really intentional around what the campaign structure looks like. We've had a similar campaign structure for some time in the state of Michigan. Since the structure has been stood up, there's been best practices that have come out nationwide. There have been promising practices at the local level in the state of Michigan that we can learn from. So part of what you see in particular in the SPOR strategy around the quality of the homeless delivery system is an effort to partner with the community to better understand, or with the state to better understand what that new structure could look like. So expect with the kickoff of the plan's implementation also some reset to some degree on what our campaign structure looks like, what our offerings look like. You know, some things that will likely change under the new plan and through its implementation. And so expect to see that in spring. And if you have additional thoughts beyond what you might provide in response to the SurveyMonkey follow-up questionnaire, I've included the email link at the bottom of the slide. So feel free to email us with your sort of questions, thoughts, reflections, observations that you might wish to share with us regarding where we're going with the plan. Jessica, do we see any more comments come in? I'll try to pull that up. Any questions in the poll that we might answer in the remaining time? Not seeing any. Okay. We're not seeing any, and I see folks leaving the webinar, which is totally fine because we're done with the content. Thank you all, and I'm happy to give you time back in your morning. You'll look for that follow-up SurveyMonkey as well as the attached slide deck from today's presentation. Thank you all for joining us, and have a great day.